So go ahead and turn your Bibles to Song of Solomon. We're still in chapter 1. A couple weeks ago, we'd done the introduction, kind of went through the first four verses. But the Song of Solomon, chapter 1. What I want to start with today, though, is about words. This section is all about words because words have the power to break down and to build up, even when they're the words about ourselves. In this section, we start off by seeing, and I'm just giving you a little kind of a rundown, then we'll go in deeper. But in this section, we see the bride's negative self-perception. She has a negative self-perception. And then it's transformed by her beloved, or her man, into affirming and affectionate words. He compliments her beauty because to him she looks great. Men, how many of our wives and how many women do you know have you ever heard this come out of their mouths? Ugh, I hate the way I look. Or this is hideous. Or how many? Oh, okay, I don't have to quote you. Okay, I don't have to quote you. Or I don't have anything to wear when the closet full of clothes. There's nothing fits. There you go. Right. I'm getting there. Okay, I'm gonna get away from it real quick. But okay, that's right. That's what we're getting ready to hit on. Yeah, there you go. But to her man, or the beloved, she is the most beautiful among all women. She is the lily among brambles or thorns, is how he describes her. She adorns herself well. Her cheeks are lovely with ornaments. In other words, she puts makeup on and looks nice. Her natural, and we'll get to this in a minute because it's one of my favorite, in all the Song of Solomon, it's one of my favorite imageries. Her natural beauty is like a mare or a horse. But she's innocent. Her eyes are like doves. And her beauty is obvious to everyone else but her for some reason. Doesn't make any sense, does it? But also those loving words that the man tells her opens her up and compels her to not only return his compliments, because she says he is like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men, but also to open up her own self to the intimacy that she's wanting. But at the last section, we end with the woman being brought into the king's chamber, in verse 4. This section will end with it being brought into the banquet house, or the house of wine, depending on which translation you use. And it ends with the couple in a very sincere and intoxicating kiss. Okay? So this section really ends with a full embrace, followed by a warning to the virgins that are off to the side that we talked about before, the third party in this poem, that addressing how to do ordered romance, how to control yourself, how to behave in a way that should be behaved in. Because when we look at this, we see the woman basically putting herself down, and she does it all through this poem, in this section, because in 2:1 she'll even say, I'm a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And we'll talk about that. Now to us, that's pretty flowers, isn't it? But to them at that time, it was just common. They were everywhere. She would give a negative review over her overall being. And here she gives a negative review of her body. So let's dive into the section and talk about each part. We're going to be starting in verse 5 today. Verse 5 says, I am very dark, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where is your pasture, your flock, where you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions? She is considering herself unattractive here. And she's doing it because of her working class complexion. You know, today, in today's society, we say dark looks good, tan looks good. But her skin is too tan. It's very dark. It's tan like leather, like coarse hides, or the tents of Kedar. Or the finely crafted curtains of Solomon. They were really thick, really kind of dark colors. And in ancient world, fair skin was preferred to dark skin when it came to beauty. Because fair skin meant you were part of the higher echelon. You weren't common. You didn't have to work outside. You were basically like a princess or someone's kept woman or something of that nature. So fair skin was more attractive in those days. And since the massive majority of the people were farmers, dark skin was just common. Whereas fair skin would have been considered exotic. Sun-darkened skin marked one as a peasant rather than a member of that high society. And then we see her talk about why she's dark. Because she considers herself unlucky to be dark. She considers herself to be ugly because it's not her fault. She has a negative self-image because the sun has looked upon her. In other words, she has to be outside because her angry, and a lot of people will say half-brothers, because she calls them her mother's sons. I'm not 100% sold on that, but any son would be the mother or brother. So either way you look at it, they forced her to labor out in the sun. They forced her to be out in the fields, keeping the family vineyards. She was unable to keep her own vineyard, she says. In other words, she was unable to attend to her own body. She was unable to do all the things that women like to do. You know, all the moisturizing regimens Sandra was talking about. Marcy has one that she goes through every night. You know, it takes 30 minutes to get in bed. But, you know, it's what they do. And we love them for it because it makes them beautiful, doesn't it, Barry? Men, we just, okay, I'm going to bed. Huh? There you go. I'm going to give you some more grapefruits here in a minute. I'm going to help you out. But she was forced to be out there. Her hair is undone. Her attire is unattractive. It's work attire. She has been busy digging ditches, planting vines, hewing out wine vats, picking grapes, shooing away foxes. She's not Queen Esther. And we were talking about Esther, how beautiful she was in the book of Esther, where her skin was softened with the oil of myrrh for 6 months before seeing the king. You look at Esther 2:12, it says, "Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulation for women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women." Could you imagine that type of spa? A whole year, nothing but on your beauty. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? She has no time, in other words, for manicures and pedicures. And she certainly had no time to powder her sunburnt cheeks before her man arrives for the rendezvous. Still, she knows she's lovely. She knows she's good looking. And it says so in 1:5. And she knows that her beloved loves her. Thus, she asks for a midday siesta or a midday date in verse 7. And this is not some scandalous date. In those days, if you were betrothed, you usually spent a daytime date amongst each other. It was an innocent getaway from her labors. She would have had a day off, basically, or at least a half a day from the vineyards, and to spend time with her man, her betrothed. So we get to that point, and we get down to verse 8. And verse 8 says, "If you do not know," and here the man is talking now. The man is talking, it's not the woman. "If you do not know, O most beautiful among women, following the tracks of the flock." In other words, he's telling her where he's going to be at. "And pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tent. I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels. You will make for you ornaments of gold and studded with silver." So the man finally speaks, doesn't he? And he invites her to basically a date, a lunch date. Follow in the tracks and you will find me. It's a poetic way of saying, come and join me where I'm at. He's a shepherd. He has to work. You got goats. Bring them out here where I'm at. Okay? So, but he does something else. To him, all that she looks, her dark skin, her messed up hair, her workaday look is beautiful. Her body is beautiful. The word beautiful is used 3 times in this section. Verse 8, here in verse 8, and again here twice in verse 15 to describe her. So just like all men, our wives are the most beautiful woman to us. They better be, hadn't they? Pay attention. They're the most beautiful woman to us. To him, and I love this phrase, she is a mare among the Pharaoh's chariots. Men, I know you're going to use that tonight to compliment your wife. Honey, you're the prettiest horse in my daddy's stables. You might get smacked because it don't mean the same thing now. But it's a compliment. I love that phrase because I love the way the 1890 Darby translation of the Bible translates it. It says, I compare thee, I love, to a steed, not a mare, but a steed in Pharaoh's chariots. A steed is defined as a horse or a horse for state of war. This word was not used in common discourse. In other words, it wasn't used when we just had regular conversations. It was only used with poetry and descriptive language and prose, and it was always used in an elegant way. So when he's calling her a mare, he's calling her the most elegant thing he's ever seen. And she just described herself as horrible. He says, no, you are the most elegant thing I've ever seen. Kind of like the hero of Black Beauty. You ever watched Black Beauty, that old movie? She is dark, and her unkempt quality, along with her healthy, glossy black hair, it drives him wild. And to his amazement, she is his. She is his. The most beautiful among women is his. How many of us feel that way? We're that lucky, aren't we? I mean, we stand and look at our wives, and we can't talk like this. We're not poets. But we can say to us, that's the most beautiful woman in the world. We don't have to look at anybody else. And she is now standing before him because the metaphors shift. Because he describes her like a queen, decked out basically to the nines, so to speak, with splendid ornamentation, jewelry that her bridesmaids have to help put in place. Her natural beauty is only enhanced by these lovely ornaments and these string of jewels. So like an Egyptian mare from the royal chariot who was dressed with this ornamental headdress, this beautiful headdress. You ever seen these horses that have their hair chopped off and just absolutely gorgeous and have all these things in them? And for these horse shows? That's what he's describing. It's how beautiful it is. This Israelite bride, she is wearing jewelry. And we know this is about marriage because Israelites only wore jewelry, with the exception of one little thing, elaborate jewelry during the wedding ceremony. They never wore it otherwise. So now stands before him, she is standing before her awestruck husband as a true beauty, head to toe. That's what he's looking at. I can just imagine. That's right. Amen. I can just imagine the man standing there with his mouth gaped open. He sees her. And after the bridesmaids put the ornaments on her and everything, and his mouth just gapes open. And then they walk over and say, here, let me help you with that. Close it shut. He just can't believe it. Men, imagine when your wife walked down the aisle on a wedding day. I mean, how nervous were you? How beautiful was she when she walked down the aisle? That's why we're nervous. Because we're standing there going, this can't be right. Can it? Even like Linwood would tell Barry, or tell Melissa, God bless your heart, Melissa. But we can't get away from it. That's how we feel. You ever just stare at your wife and realize, wow, how in the world did I land someone so beautiful? I'm not skating on thin ice now, am I, John? Kind of laid on thick now. But we move on. The song moves on. Let's go on to verse 12. While the king was on his couch, my nard gave forth its fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breast. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of Engadi. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful. Our couch is green. The beams of our house are cedar, and our rafters are pine. Now these verses kind of show the success of the woman, even though she didn't do anything other than look good. The kind of success of her quest. The queen, the dark vineyard worker turned shepherdess. Pasture your goats beside her, the shepherds, it says in verse 8. And the king, he's tending his flocks. They are depicted as lying together, looking into each other's eyes and complimenting each other back and forth. You see the poem shifts back and forth between the two complimenting each other. And the setting is pastoral. And I'm not talking about like pastor and preaching or anything like that. I'm talking about actual sheep herders. They're actually out in the field in the middle of a sheep field. That's the setting. But it's highly sensory. In other words, their senses are on high alert. Their touch, their sight, their smell, their taste, their hearing. All five are in overdrive. Their couch is apparently the grass, because it says her couch is green, or I think the King James Version says verdant. Their house or canopy is the trees. The beams of her house are cedars. Her rafters are pine. So what we see is their love growing slowly. Their love is not quick or it's not just physical only. Rather, it's growing at a stable, constant rate, just like the forest. It's slowly moving. It's growing into more and more deep. And her perfume, it says, my nard in verse 12, it wafts around their bodies. It just wraps around their bodies. And she rejoices in his sweet smelling closeness. Now, we should be familiar with the word nard, shouldn't we? We all know what the word nard is. We're familiar because of what Mary anointed Jesus' feet with when she was preparing for him for death. The nard in the alabaster jar. And in Mark 14:3 it says, and while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, he was reclining at a table, and a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. Again, in John 12:3 he says, Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And then she also says, my beloved to me is a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breast. This is not sexual in any way, what she's talking about here. This is like in those times, Israelite women, and actually a lot of women in that area, would wear a necklace that had a little leather pouch. And that little leather would carry a little bit of myrrh in it to help with smell. They sweated a lot. There wasn't good baths. So obviously there would be body odor. So they would wear this around their necks to help smell and help with the smell. And people wouldn't be able to smell them as much. It was just a common thing. So they both love the smell of one another. She is also praising him for his exotic attractiveness and his sustenance, comparing him to the henna blossoms, that grow in the royal vineyards, or on the largest oasis in Israel, on the western shore of the Dead Sea. I think it's called the Engadi basically around the Dead Sea area, it's basically desert. But ever so often you have oases. And in those oases, there were flowers that would grow. And they were very rare and used for perfumes. So this would have been a very rare and expensive perfume they were talking about on both sides. She was comparing his smell basically to the most fragrant of fragrances. In other words, he smelled better than anybody else, and she smelled better than anybody else. And then he centers on her beauty. Again, like I said, in verse 15, he says, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful." And then he shifts his focus. He shifts his focus on her eyes, into which he's apparently gazing deeply. He compares them to doves. Now, there's several things that you can look at this way. The doves, they might be describing their disposition. In other words, you can see that she may be timid. Her nature may be a timid nature. Or they may have been the color of a dove, pearly gray with just a little bit of speck of color. Or a shape, almost almond-shaped, like the contours of the bird's body with its wings folded in. But I believe it symbolizes the innocent intimacy that they're dealing with here. Here, he does not describe her thighs. He does not describe her breast, which he will later on. Nor does she describe his abdomen. It's all in the eyes. It's eye-to-eye intimacy, as innocent as doves. In other words, they are focused on the neck up. Okay? Matthew 10:16 said about the innocence, Jesus even says about doves, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpent and innocent as doves." That shows that they are not doing anything at wedlock. They are not doing anything that is improper. They are choosing to focus on everything from the neck up, basically. What they are doing is they are practicing, even though they are very attracted to one another, even though they are very in love with one another, they are practicing self-control, and they are falling deeper and deeper in love. Now, this section ends with her returning the compliment. She admires his beauty and the pleasures he brings. It says, "Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful." However, there is more than just verbal words here, back and forth. Because physical pleasures are play as well, or at least they're introduced here. For the couple to be lying together on the grass, close enough to smell each other's bodies and see eye to eye into each other's face, and for the bride to describe her beloved as the sachet of myrrh that lies beneath her breast, between her breasts, it introduces this idea of eroticism, the eros love we talked about a couple weeks ago, that they're going to seek in marriage, and they will follow up in the later chapters. Because when you look at the whole book of Psalms, the whole book of Song of Solomon, it's laid out in the wedding ceremony. First few chapters are the introduction and the greeting, and we're at that phase right now. The later chapters is in the night of consummation, when the groom comes and gets his bride, and then the last chapters are the wedding feast. So you have that whole Jewish wedding ceremony laid out. So we're going to see all that, but it's just being introduced here. So we move on to chapter 2. And this is where we talk about the rose of Sharon. In chapter 2, starting in verse 1, he says, "I am a rose of Sharon." She is talking about this. "A lily of the valleys. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. As an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was his love. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me." Again, the bride offers herself as a negative assessment. This time, though, it's not merely her body in view, but her whole being. She claims to be the rose of Sharon. Like I said, we think it's beautiful flowers, don't we? Or a lily. We think they're beautiful. But put differently, it's basically At least she's a flower and not a weed. But in those days, those were very common in that area. There was nothing unexceptional about them. There was basically like a country wildflower that you see on the side of the road all the time. And what do we do with those most of the time? Use a weed eater and whack them down and get rid of them. But he begs to differ because he stays with the analogy and expands she is as a lily among the brambles or thorns. In other words, she is the flower among all the ugliness. The analogy is easy to understand. She is the best looking, and her unique beauty makes all the other young women appear ugly to him. In other words, he's saying, you are Cinderella, and the rest of these women are your ugly stepsisters. So, with that high compliment, she opens up like a flame lily in the sun, it says. Have you ever seen a flame lily? I have an image right here, but I can't get it to pull up on my iPad. I highly encourage you to look at a flame lily and then watch a time-lapse video of it being opened every morning as it opens in the sun. It's bright red and it's beautiful. And it just opens like that. All the petals just kind of open all at once. And she again, what does she do? She returns the compliment. She moves the metaphor from a flower to a tree because a tree is sturdy, it's strong, it's rooted. If she is a lily among brambles, then he is the apple tree among the trees of the forest. I mean, what can an apple tree among the forest do for you? Feed you, provide for you, give you everything you need to survive, protect you. That's what he is to her. They are basically saying, in the easiest way to put it, they're basically saying, like two lovesick teenagers, I love you more. No, I love you more. No, I love you more. I loved you first. I love you to infinity. Or as we put it in my introduction from the poem, how I love thee. Let me count the ways. From the end of verse 3 to the verse 6, the language turns from talk to touch. She goes from sitting in his protective and soothing shade to noting how his fruit was sweet to my taste. The tasting is always symbolic of physical intimacy in the Song of Solomon. And it continues on into the next two verses. Finally, the symbolism subsides and this becomes literal hand is shown and felt. She is lying down. He's either beside her or on top of her. And his left hand holds her head up and rests beneath it while his right hand embraces her. Here's where I disagree with a lot of modern commentators. I believe you need to go back to the classicals, the Matthew Henrys, the Albert Barnes, to look at this section. Because many will say this is where they do things they shouldn't be doing. I disagree with that. Because if the whole thing is the wedding ceremony, then it violates all the rules God put in place. I say that they don't go into the risque touching and feeling part yet. I believe they are just kissing at this point in time. And they stop at that until later on. Because the whole song, like I said, is a wedding ceremony. And here is their first kiss. And consider who's describing it. The woman. A woman is describing the kiss. And when women describe kisses, they describe it differently than men. You know, if you're with your girlfriends and you describe that first kiss that you had from your boyfriend, you're going to say things like, well, you know, you can tell about a man from that very first kiss. Everything about a man, can't you? That's the old saying. Or, it was such a beautiful kiss. It was slow. It was passionate. Now, maybe we don't do that now. Men, on the other hand, will just say, we went out, yeah, we kissed. That's it. We're not going to be poetic about it. We're not going to be all emotional about it. It's an intense kiss, but that is it. It is just a kiss. Because look what she says in verse 7. Verse 2:7, we're going to end with this tonight. It says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles of the by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. In other words, she's telling the virgins and the other women, I pray you are not kissed like this before you're ready, because it's torture controlling yourself. But that is exactly what they're doing. So what can we take from this little section other than you better know how to kiss? And you better know how to talk nice to them? Well, the Bible has a lot to say about words, especially in the wisdom literature. For instance, in Job, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Psalms, all of it's about words. Here in Song of Solomon, we are given more wisdom on words. Rather than admonishment, such as Jesus declaring that we're going to have to give an account for every careless word that we say in Matthew 12:36-37, or a way Solomon does it when he talks about death and life or is the power in the tongue in Proverbs 18:21. Here, the Song of Solomon, that poetry paints a picture of the power of kind, romantic, sweet, and affirming words that husbands and wives speak to one another. Husband and wives are to compliment one another by complimenting one another. When was the last time you complimented your wife? We are to speak truth. And it should be true when we compliment them. We are to speak truth in love. Ephesians 4:15. We are not to let any unwholesome talk come out of our mouths, but only what is helpful for building each other up. Ephesians 4:29. This goes not just for talking about Christians, but talking to our husbands and wives. We are to get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander. Do you get rid of that between your husband and wife? Sometimes we don't, do we? Sometimes they deserve it, but do we get rid of it? We are to be kind and tender-hearted to one another. And here's the big one. How many of us forgive one another in our marriage? Ephesians 4:32. But beyond the theme of the power of words, which the case does lead to a sweet kiss and embrace, the bride gives the song's first wisdom admonition. Notice how the author does it. The admonition or advice comes not through the voice of a celibate prophet, not through a learned rabbi or a stern sage or even a father or a mother, but through the voice of a betrothed bride who is following God and controlling her physical conduct. This book is about peer pressure at its biblical best. The song's refrain teaches that pure passion waits for the proper time, marriage, and the proper person, one's spouse. Delayed gratification is a foundation of Christian ethics and love. As we wait for our heavenly bridegroom with our lamps burning, ready to enter the marriage feast, we wait for marriage, for sexual expression, because it's worth the wait. Glorious blessings await those who are patient. But what if we have not waited for marriage? What if we did do that? I'm guilty of it in the past. That situation is certainly not hopeless. For in the gospel, God offers forgiveness for sins through Jesus. Just as God selected Israel from all nations and set His love upon her, despite no beauty in her whatsoever, that's what it says in Deuteronomy 7:6 and 8, He extends long-suffering, mercy, even through eras of spiritual darkness. That's Hosea 14:4-8. Then compare Hosea 2:16-20. What He forgave in them. How many times did Israel turn and go and whore with another person, with another nation, another God? How many times did they play the harlot in Hosea? We see that over and over. So in Christ, He has set His love on His church. And a group of people who are once, we think ourselves as very dark, very unloving, very unlovely, and they were in rebellion. Paul attests God shows his love for us that even though while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. When we are weighed down by sin, even and especially sexual sin, we must remember that Jesus did not come to call the righteous, but to call sinners. Matthew 9:13. He came to heal the sick, free the slaves, and forgive the debtors. It's all through the New Testament. He came to show love to the loveless, that they might be lovely also. Because as ugly as we consider ourselves, as ugly as we think we are, when Jesus looks at his bride, he calls us beautiful. And if we want to hear a fresh voice from the bridegroom say, your sins are forgiven, go in peace, we have to come to Christ in repentance and faith, following the example of the sinful woman in Luke 7:36 through 50, the woman caught in adultery. Go and sin no more. We must trust that Jesus can cover all our darknesses because he is the light of the world. And when we do, we're going to hear our groom, Jesus, call us beautiful. Just as he does in Song of Solomon 1:15. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves.